Hey, everybody. It is noon in the East. It is 9 in the West. This is the Monday, Memorial Day version of Lunch with Lincoln. Hope everyone is having a nice long weekend and remembering those folks who made the ultimate sacrifice for our freedom. My guest today is the one and only Joe Trippi. Joe, thanks for joining me.
Great to be with you, Reed.
So, Joe, first thing I want to talk about is the results we saw last week in Georgia. First, what you thought of them generally. Second, this idea that I think is being pushed by probably a lot of my former colleagues that somehow Brian Kemp's victory means the end of Trump. And we're seeing a lot of that sort of floating around. Next, I want to talk about, how you see something that you wrote back in January for us about, the Republican candidates, aside from a Brian Kemp being, these cuckoo birds. And then lastly, just sort of how you see here we are just about 5 months from election day, what's different than you thought it would be and how do you see the next few weeks? So let's start in Georgia. Last Tuesday, Governor Brian Kemp, the incumbent, beat his primary opponent, the Trump-backed David Perdue, by 50 points, which, I mean, just mathematically, I'm not sure you can lose by much more,
Right.
But there's this idea coming out of the DC press corps, and you can definitely see it out of the Republican Governors Association, everything else, that Brian Kemp is who Republicans really are, right? This is the return to normalcy for the Republican Party. This is what Republican governors will look like. Aside from the fact that that's just not true, also it wasn't a surprise that Kemp was going to beat Perdue. It was a surprise, I think, that he beat him by as much as he did, but this hasn't been in doubt for several months. So what's your sense, having spent as much time inside the Beltway, like why are they pushing this so hard?
I don't know. It's just like it's some kind of it's crazy because it's not true, like you said. I mean,
Mm,
this is like pretty amazing when you look at it. Purdue was already rejected by Georgia once. It's not like
right.
it was like some strong candidate. And then on top of it, it was clear from the get-go it wasn't going to work. That Purdue wasn't going to be able to mount much of a challenge, and hell, he stopped running ads a month out. I mean, when you
Right.
don't run ads for a month going into election day, that's what blew that thing up to a 50-point defeat instead of the 20 or 25 points that it probably would have been. But no, this is not about return to normal. I mean, you look at in the Secretary of State's race where I mean, barely got got above the 50% needed.
Right. Brad Raffensperger. Yeah.
Brad Raffensperger, right, to avoid that runoff. And I think a lot of that was probably Democrats, enough of them actually voting in the Republican primary for him because he did stand up to Trump on in his in the big steal. So I think some, and maybe some of those points were also with Kemp, but I just think it's crazy to think that or even to insinuate that Trump's hold on the party uh, isn't near total. I mean, again, look at Pennsylvania with Dr. Oz and Barnett. I mean, they added up to over like 60 something percent of the vote.
Right.
And it's hard to argue that isn't the MAGA wing of the party, the Trump wing of the party. And it's even, McCormick, it's not like he wasn't getting a share of that too. So it's hard
Right.
to really see anything in these results that we've seen recently that suggest anything other than Trump still having total control. And the other thing I'd add is, okay, so we all know right now, if Trump tells MAGA voters in Georgia not to vote for Kemp because he wouldn't do what needs to be done, Kemp has a tough time getting those people to vote. So who does he need right now? Who is he again hostage to? To Donald Trump. So I just think this just points to either way, Trump wins in the current environment of the GOP.
Yeah, well, so I want to stick to Georgia for one sec before we move into some of the other places you talked about, because this is one of those things that we've talked about, right? So Herschel Walker, the U.S. Senate nominee now for the Republican Party, basically ran unopposed. despite, I think, several weeks and probably a lot of money on the part of Mitch McConnell and his team to try and drop as much opposition research on Herschel as they could when he first announced he was going to get in the race. So now, to your point, Kemp and Herschel are both sort of damned if they do and damned if they don't. Herschel Walker's not going to go anywhere near Brian Kemp because he's a Trump guy through and through. He's a MAGA guy through and through. Kemp doesn't really want much to do with Herschel Walker, but he needs, to your point, some of those base voters because, Joe, this is one thing I want to bring up, which is you mentioned that in Pennsylvania, it was 60 plus in the U.S. Senate race there were 60 plus people who were, sort of MAGA candidates and one who was sort of MAGA in sheep's clothing, or a sheep in MAGA clothing might be a better way to put it. But that, this stuff is always going to come down to the margins. And so in Georgia, if Kemp loses 10% of ultra MAGA voters, right, that could be it for him.
Yeah, it would be. That's why I think this is not anything other than Trump having complete, again, hold on the party. He can hold Kemp hostage, and basically make him come to Trump, come to him on bended knee to get his support. So it's going to be really fascinating to see how this split plays out, because I think we're going to see it over and over and over again, and not just between with Kemp here, but I think across the country you're going to see even in Pennsylvania. What do those McCormick voters do? If Trump pulls this out.
And so in Pennsylvania, Trump endorsed Doug Mastriano. Mastriano wins, not by a ton, but by enough. Oz, he endorses Dr. Oz. Dr. Oz is likely to win even in a recount. 1,000 votes is tough to overcome, right? Again, on the margin, but enough. In Ohio, right? The Trump endorsement probably puts JD Vance over the line. And so I want this narrative of, 60% of people voted against JD Vance. It doesn't matter. He's the nominee, and he would not have been but for Donald Trump. Oz would not have been but for Donald Trump. Mastriano, maybe he sneaks through without it, but certainly got a boost by Trump. And so, again, it doesn't matter whether or not 70% of primary voters switch their vote to the guy who Trump endorsed, because at the end of the day, that's the person who's going to be on the ballot. Yeah. If they win, Trump will say, I did it. If they lose, they said they didn't stick enough to me, which is like his sort of stock and trade.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I think, you see people saying things like, well, it's only 30% of the party, 30% is not enough to win a nomination. It's crap. I mean,
it absolutely is enough.
Yeah, if you have to look at Oz, look at these candidates, 31% up there, I think, in Pennsylvania. I mean, it's clearly big enough to make sure you're in it and can win the nomination. And if you're somebody like Kemp, an incumbent, you're gonna get some other voters to come along as well. There wasn't an incumbent in the Pennsylvania races,
right.
But so no, I just think this is like just wishful thinking, or trying to create a different narrative than actually exists. The narrative is clear here. Donald Trump is dominating the Republican primary season, period.
Well, and the thing too about, and this is where, certainly I made a mistake. I think many of us who did not ever want to see Donald Trump ascend to the presidency, which is, we should not make an assumption, like I think so many of especially the Republican guys who work for the governors, when Mastriano won the nomination in Pennsylvania a couple of weeks ago, very lukewarm statement of support, because they've made a determination that on paper he can't win. And I think that is a determination that gets a lot of people in trouble. And I think goes back to what Stewart likes to call that normalcy bias, right? Which is, they don't think he can win, therefore they're probably not going to do much. But that's just when the Donald Trumps of the world, or the Doug Mastrianos of the world, or out in Arizona, Joe, like a nut like Kerry Lake jumps up and wins. And now you're like, well, how could it have happened? Well, how many more times, Joe, do we have to ask in 6 years? How could it have happened? Right. Until people say, oh, wait a second, maybe rather than asking a stupid question after the fact. We do something to ensure it doesn't occur in the first place.
Right, right. And so a lot of people are looking at what looks to be the way Pennsylvania is going to play out of the all Trump MAGA ticket of Mastriano and Oz, as easy to beat. And that's not how we should be playing this. We need to understand we can't count on that. We've got to get the vote out. We've got to fight for the marginal voters, and we got to make sure that there's enough energy to win those both the governorship and the Senate in Pennsylvania. And I think the one thing that this is pointing to, though, is something that we talked about, for a large part of the early part of this year, is could they nominate enough kind of bridge too far candidates, too lunatic, too crazy,
Right.
That they would be like in 2010, putting themselves in a position to lose seats they should have a decent chance of pulling out. And I think that is, but it's my hope still that that's what's going on here, that we're seeing that as long as we all do what we need to do. I think we're seeing the Republicans and the MAGA hats nominating the kind of people that I think are going to give a lot of sane citizens pause.
So let's get down into sort of campaign tactics here, Joe. So let's stay in Pennsylvania for a second. So right now, you've got Doug Mastriano going up against Shapiro, who's the sitting attorney general, is the Democratic nominee. Mastriano's a nut. He's off in other states actually campaigning for other nuts. I see a lot of stuff from Shapiro, at least on the social media side, a lot of stuff that's seems to be shoring up his base. But my question is, why not define this guy now? Why not define Mastriano now? And then on the Senate side too, which is, we know that Governor Fetterman was laid up by a stroke right before the primary. But why not, if you can't get out and campaign anyway because of your health issues, what better situation could you have than your potential opponents duking it out? Like, why would, and we assume that Oz will win a recount. Why wouldn't you just be bashing the heck out of him, in the days and maybe weeks, maybe it won't be that long, while they're fighting each other?
That's a lesson that I still can't believe the Democrats, my fellow Democrats, have not learned from the Youngkin campaign last year in Virginia. We said then, what the big lesson should have been is you have to define these candidates early. You cannot let them come out of the primary and then give them give them free air, clear air with no turbulence to reposition themselves to, and to reintroduce themselves to voters the way Youngkin was able to do in Virginia. And that's why early, I think, I think you see this in Nevada too, in that Senate race. Democrats are not getting out there and defining the Republicans right away. And in Pennsylvania, it's clear that you got to define Mastriano and Dr. Oz, go after them early. I think money spent now to do that is going to be much more powerful than waiting to the end. Democrats always tend to do this. We wait to the very end, hoard our cash, and then drop it. And by then, people they've rehabilitated themselves. They've moved on with their message and are able to put on a sweater vest. And the next thing you know, you're waking up saying, as you said, Reed, how the hell did that happen? How'd they get in? How did we not see it coming? We can see this coming. We can define, and particularly Mastriano. I mean, he's already talking about firing with one stroke of the pen, firing every election official that he wants to make sure the results come out the way he wants. It's crazy if he wins.
And my guess is probably a lot of election officials in the T, the sort of from,
Yeah.
south of York up through, Erie in the west and Scranton, Wilkes-Barre north of there in the east. They'll all keep their jobs. My guess is in Center City, Philadelphia, probably not.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just, again, I think it's early definition of all these candidates. The same thing and I think Tim Ryan is doing very well or better
Right.
than most Democrats in going after JD Vance pretty hard right after JD won that with Trump's endorsement, won the GOP primary up in Ohio.
Last question on Pennsylvania, Joe. So Kathy Barnett, who you mentioned, finished third in the Republican Senate primary. She got 24% of the vote, and near as I can tell, Joe, she didn't run a campaign for all intents and purposes. How does that happen?
I think, look,
24% is not like they're the gadfly. They run every year. They got 5%. They're always going to get their 5%. I mean, she almost assuredly took 10, 12, 15 points away from Oz. Like, from where? Out of nowhere.
Well, this is what I've been talking about. One of the reasons I think Fetterman has a real solid, strong chance against Oz is I think, like, Oz is fake. I mean, he's fake Pennsylvania. Yeah. He reeks of it. There's nothing real or authentic about the guy. And I think with probably a lot of even with Trump's endorsement, Trump got him the 31%, got him over the hump. But I think there are a lot of MAGA voters who smelled that, got it, and went like, she's real.
Right.
Barnett, she's real MAGA. This guy, he's a phony, which I think is going to hurt him in the general. And I think forget about ideological differences or even policy. I think Fetterman, the one thing Fetterman is authentic. He's real Pennsylvania. And so I think that benefited her. That's why she grows from nothing, because they already figured out that, if you look at it the other way, basically, 60-something% of the Republican primaries said not Oz. And I think a lot of that, when you look at MAGA voters, was because they just didn't see him as real MAGA the way they saw her. So if he's not real even to those people, and Fetterman is real, authentic Pennsylvania, whether you agree with him on an issue or not, he is. I think that authenticity is going to really be a problem for Dr. Oz to get past, because he's inauthentic. He's not real Pennsylvania. He's a carpetbagger phony. So I think, that, plus I do think both he and Mastriano are bridged too far for a lot of moderate Republicans and independents, given how strident they have been on the to carry Trump's water. The interesting thing to me was I thought Dr. Oz tried to do a little Reagan-esque kind of talking on election night, so he may be already trying to move away. But I think that's just going to make those MAGA voters say, "See, I knew he was a phony, right? I knew he was."
Well, and that's right, and that's one thing we've talked about with the likes of, like, the Elise Stefanik's of the world, or the Ted Cruz's of the world, or the Josh Hawleys of the world, which is the ones who are truly dedicated to power and nothing else. When they have that opportunity, they double and triple down.
Right.
They're not true. Mastriano is a true believer, right? He's washed in the blood of ultra MAGA.
Yeah.
Oz is not, and Oz is like, he's thinking, like, ironically enough, like a normal candidate would, or his people are, which is, okay, we ran to Trump in the primary. Now I got to moderate and come back to the middle. But to your point, in the game we're in, as Trigby likes to call it, Joe, doing that means exactly what you said. We knew it. I voted for him in the primary because Trump told me to, but I knew this guy. Like, he doesn't live here, right? And so he's not of us. He's not one of us. He wouldn't deign to come sit in my bar outside of, in Allegheny County or York County, wherever it is, right? And so that's where they're really, I think that's why you see so many of them, have to go further and further into the crazy hole, because they have to be like, okay, I've got to hold this base, because as I've mentioned many times, Jeremy Peters' book about the sort of downfall of the GOP is that they're not Republicans, they're not conservatives, they're anti-liberals, which means there's almost anarchists. They don't really care anyway,
Right.
except if it's somebody who's going to toe the line on whatever. And let me ask you this: how is it that, and I would have asked the same question of Barnett. How is it that a man of Turkish descent, carries the sort of white Christian nationalist message that so many of these folks are looking for?
No, exactly it. I mean, that's what I'm talking about. He's not authentic Pennsylvania at all. I mean, it doesn't connect. I think the only thing that got him, if there's one candidate who got there completely because of the endorsement, I mean, got that clearly got over the hump only because of Trump's endorsement through the years so far. I think it's Dr. Oz. I don't think there was
Mm,
any compelling reality to why him, right? Except that that Trump, oh, TV celebrity, and so he sees himself or whatever, and he goes that way. Um, but even the endorsement of Mastriano was because even Trump had started losing faith in Dr. Oz's ability to pull it out. So at the
right,
last minute pulls out his endorsement, gives these endorsement for governor to Mastriano so he can at least have one win on election day on primary day.
right.
He got both, but I think it was like literally just him in terms of Dr. Oz. I mean, you can go to Ohio and argue that Trump was the push that reignited Vance, but uh, but I think the one that clearly could not have gotten there without the endorsement of Trump was Oz, and it turns out he's the phoniest MAGA candidate out there, and I think it's going to show even more and be the least authentic person out there in terms of matching the state. It has got to be him, and then in that case, you look the other way, and there's Fetterman, and like I said, I mean, you talk about having a beer at the local, bar in the
Right,
tea, even. It's Fetterman, man. It's clear
right.
that matches up.
It was interesting too when Trump endorsed Doug Mastriano, there was another guy in the race, a guy named Lou Barletta, who was maybe not like he was super Trumpy, but not like hair on fire Trumpy like Mastriano was, but no shrinking violet. And he gets up after the fact and is like, "Where's the loyalty? Where's the loyalty?" And I'm just, Joe, I'm always fascinated. Like this, I mean, Rick literally wrote a book called Everything Trump Touches Dies, right?
Yeah,
And it's true
it's
from the
true.
moment that Rick published it to this second. And they'd never get it. He doesn't care.
No, and Barletta would have been a much better general election candidate than Mastriano. It doesn't matter. That's what I'm saying. It's not just you look on paper, you would think that's who I'm going to endorse. And by the way, I should be loyal to him, but
Right.
no, hey, there's a TV celebrity in the race. I mean, or whatever I mean, it's just
Yeah.
crazy.
Well, and that was what they said about JD Vance too, because remember Vance had
Yeah,
said lots of terrible things about Trump in 16, called him American Hitler. But Trump
yeah,
saw he wrote a book. There was a movie made about him, and then he went down to Mar-a-Lago, and he was just impressed, Joe, by the beautiful golf swing, the beautiful
yeah,
golf swing of JD Vance, right? Like it's guys, gang, watching. This is not normal life. This is insanity. Like, and like we should not like get our what's left of our hair, on fire every time we see it, but like stop being surprised by it.
yeah. No, I mean, that's like we're picking Senate nominees because of golf swings. Brilliant. I mean, it's just like it's just with everything going on today, that's what we need. But yeah, no, this is what I'm saying. It's like there was no lawyer. Your point, like that these guys still think that they're subservience to Trump, that they're doing everything in service to him is somehow going to be rewarded out of his loyalty back to them is
Right.
crazy. Not because they don't shouldn't hope that, but because there is evidence after one person after another where he has screwed over, as Rick says, everything he touches dies, and they still haven't learned that one.
Well,
Just
and then you see a little bit too of, so you like down in the Alabama Senate primary that occurred last week.
yeah,
Um, Mo Brooks, who Trump had endorsed and then pulled his endorsement when he thought Brooks was fading. Brooks and a woman named, I think, Katie Britt, I think her name is,
Yeah, that's it.
pulled through in the primary. And I get, and the reason I bring it up is because Brooks went, he did the same thing to Trump, which is the guy keeps asking me, he kept asking me when I was in Congress, Mo, you got to figure out how to overturn the election. You got to overturn the election. You got to overturn the election. I kept going, you can't do it. It's not doable. Right. He's like, and by the way, Trump really did lose in 2020.
Right.
Right. Like, so there is no loyalty among these thieves.
No, not at all. No, and by the way, Brooks started coming back a little after he did that. So it's kind of, these fights are, I think, just showing in a lot of ways, it's the opposite of what I think is getting reported. It's not that a Kemp, the occasional Kemp shows that Trump's losing his grip on the party. It's more that, like what you see with, I think, Oz and Barnett are a better example of what's really going on. He's losing control of MAGA. That
Right.
that that he can control enough of it to get Oz the nomination, but look at how much of it said, no, that's not real MAGA. This is real MAGA. Barnett's real MAGA. So I think there's even like
No,
splits. They're like multiple different kind of fractures that are going on right now in the Republican Party, all around the Trump line. Not
right.
on
Well,
the
and
Trump line.
that's an interesting point too, Joe, because, if to your point, like, I mean, Trump is the alpha prime of the movement, right?
Yeah,
But there's nothing that says that, yeah, it couldn't get out of his grasp. And again, remember, this is never a guy who's had a strategic thought in his life. So the idea that, he's somehow, you know, Lenin or Joseph Stalin or
yeah,
Mao, who like understands the movement under his power and does everything he can to control it, shape it, grow it, everything else. Like he's just out there sort of, he keeps getting lucky. Um, and so, but to your point, Mastriano's way outside that line.
yeah,
Barnett's way outside that line. You could make an argument that as much as he loves her, Kerry Lake in Arizona is way outside that line. And there's a guy up in Minnesota who I think is too. And then, whichever of the five remaining gubernatorial candidates in Michigan, the ones that didn't get tossed off the ballot for fake signatures on a petition, they'll go that way too. And I think, and there was just an article I think somebody wrote, maybe it was Dana Milbank, to your point, Joe, which is if there is a belief that Trump is losing his grip, that there will be people who will go more extreme,
yeah,
right? That will
absolutely.
say
Right.
even Trump isn't far enough for us. And I guess the question is, as we get through, the rest of this primary season, as we start to look forward, I know I hate to do it, into 23 and 24, is how many of these, specifically Republicans who want to run for president aren't saying, okay, I'm in line with that, because we've already seen it out of Elise Stefanik, right? Like she's gone that way. And she's a Harvard educated,
Yeah,
smartest kid in the room. Stuart, she used to work for our senior advisor, Stuart Stevens. He said she was funny. She was a smart aleck. Like, she was even to the left of most of the Republicans that she worked with. And now she's like, oh, great replacement theory, talking bad about black people. Let's do it. Like, I'm all in on that.
yeah, because I mean, there's no other way you're going to get the nomination. I mean, in a lot of ways, if MAGA continues to move towards the Mastrianos out there that are even beyond the pale for Trump, which we can question whether that's true or not. But when they go that far, you still got to get to the right of it, even further out than them to stop them from getting the nomination. That's what she's figured out. And I think that's why whether it's DeSantis or Abbott, whoever, you're going to see, a much meaner, uglier, I think, Trump-like candidacy in 2024, whether Trump runs or not.
Yeah. No, and I think that's worrisome too, because and we see this with what happened down in Uvalde. What we saw was, which was a tragedy, and we don't know the motivation behind that gunman. But in Buffalo a few weeks ago, that young man was racially motivated, right? He was on these chat rooms. He did write this manifesto about how African Americans and Jews are the problem, right? And so that's and we see so much of this stuff, Joe, which for us even, I mean, it was unthinkable, right? This stuff is mainstream now. Tucker Carlson talks about it. Sean Hannity and Laura Ingraham play footsie with it. And I don't think you can really play footsie with this stuff. I think you're in for a dime, you're in for a dollar, right? You don't get to sort of tiptoe into the white Christian nationalist, anti-Semitic, anti-Black, anti-Latino, anti-Asian whirlpool without it sucking you in eventually.
No, you got to look. It's everybody. This is when this stuff happens. You want to pour cooler water on it, not fuel it. And I think that's because it's some of this is all in the dark recesses of the internet. In much darker places than Facebook or Twitter or
Right.
even Reddit. And then when you see someone like Tucker Carlson give it air, on a cable television station with millions of viewers, that actually empowers it and fuels it, I think, and brings it out of those dark recesses. And I think that's what we're starting to see. And it's it's really dangerous. And I think but I don't see Tucker or any of them stopping, right? That's what's so crazy about it. It's like, when do they get it that they need to be cooling the heat, not putting more gas on the fire?
Well, yeah, I mean, so I was on a phone call on Friday with someone, and we were talking about this potential for violence, and they reminded me of the first, I think it was the first presidential debate between Trump and Joe Biden, when Trump was asked a question, I think about the Proud Boys, and he told them to quote, stand back and stand by, which had never been, that kind of sentiment had never been uttered by a sitting United States president. Then, he said just I think a week or so ago, he had retweeted or reposted, whatever his Truth Social thing is, a guy talking about civil war. And this is one, and then we saw this story about, Trump mused, well, maybe it wouldn't be a bad thing if they hung Mike Pence. And it goes back to what Mary Trump told us a couple of years ago, which is, so long as Donald Trump believes that his personal safety is assured, which it is by the men and women of the United States Secret Service, that he'll pour as much gasoline on the fire as he thinks he can, because he's not worried about his own safety. And that opens up, I think, a whole avenue of, what I fear, Joe, is that, as we get deeper into this year and the temperature on this election starts to rise even higher than it is, and we get into 23 and 24, those guys in the Hawaiian shirts, and the AR-15 strapped on their shoulders, threatening people in the streets, it only takes one guy to pull the trigger one time, and then we're off the map altogether. I mean, look, we're already off the map. We're even further off the map. And then, what happens after that?
No, that's right. But that's why it's even more important for the Tucker Carlsons and elected leaders in the Republican Party to speak out against it, not fuel it. And that's that's the scary part. I mean, I understand. We're used to Trump. I don't think anybody's shocked that he admired or liked the hang Mike Pence chants, right? Or even encouraged them. But that the rest of the party, that so much of it, and so much of the punditry and opinion leaders on the right mimic it and parrot it, or even get out in front of it even further and pour more fuel on that hatred and that division and the danger. I mean, fueling the danger. That's the thing that I just think all of us, every former Republican, independent, Democrat out there. That's what building that pro-democracy coalition that we talk about, and people going to join the union.us to become part of that broad thing. We need it because it's the only thing that's going to push back against this stuff.
Well, that's right. And before we wrap up, I mean, I think that's the other thing too is, if you're watching this and you're going to vote for the pro-democracy candidate, thank you. Go to jointheunion.us. But here's a question we're going to start. Actually, not a question. This is something we're going to tell a lot of people I know, people of my cohort, Joe, right? middle-aged, white, suburban Republicans. Like, make a choice. Make the choice now. What's your choice? You're going to be with these people, with the ugliness and the racism and the lack of respect for any institution and education, or are you going to be with people who you don't always agree with, but like you can go to bed at night saying, you know what, they didn't burn the country down while I was asleep. And I think it's got to be that clear, Joe, because think about it. Like we joke, guys, internally, like we tried to make a couple of ads that were sort of satirical in nature, and it just went over everybody's heads. They're like, why did you make that ad? Why did you support JD Vance? We're like, we didn't. It was satire. It was parody. But like, irony is dead, Joe. So you just got to put it in people's faces. All right. Well, listen, Joe, I want to thank you for joining me as always, gang. Want to leave you with a spot about Memorial Day. And how we feel about the sacrifice that so many American men and women have made on behalf of our freedom. With that, Joe, I'll say thank you. And Felicia, let's roll it.
In every generation, they stand. In every generation, they serve. In every generation, they sacrifice. For 2.5 centuries, on land, sea, and in the air, they've fought and died for an idea bigger than themselves. They are the Americans of every race and faith who swear a sacred oath of honor and live it to the last. And when that moment comes, they lay down their lives for the country they love, protecting their comrades, their families, and their nation. They are the bold angels now, examples to us all. On this day, let us honor their sacrifice and call upon ourselves to walk in their footsteps boldly, for they have led the way to the America we must be. The Lincoln Project is responsible for the content of this advertising.